Hi everyone, my name's Ashley D'Arcangelo, and today we're going to be talking about digestion and metabolism and what really happens to your food when you eat it. So think about the last thing that you ate and where do you think it is in your digestive system or in your body right now? How long ago did you eat it? What was it? What's it doing? Where's it hanging out? Our learning objectives for today are to be able to summarize what happens during the 4 steps of digestion. Describe the role of the digestive organs in breaking down food. Distinguish the difference between anabolic and catabolic processes. Describe factors that influence metabolism. And summarize what happens to our food once we eat it. The 4 steps in digestion are ingestion, digestion, absorption, and excretion. So we're going to cover all 4 of these steps to see from start to finish what happens to our food and how do we get energy that we need out of it. When you think about digestion, where do you think it starts? What do you think the first step in digestion is? So our food actually begins being digested in the mouth. When we eat our burger here, the first thing we do is take a bite of it. Then our mouth, our teeth, our tongue, everything works together to chew the food up and break it down into smaller pieces. So this is an example of mechanical digestion where our body is breaking the food down into little pieces without changing the composition of the food. Chemical digestion also starts in the mouth. So, amylase is an enzyme that's released by your body that begins breaking down carbohydrates. And again, that happens before you even swallow your food. Once you're done chewing up your food, it forms this little ball and you swallow it. When you swallow your food, it goes down your esophagus and enters into your stomach. Once your food is in your stomach, mechanical digestion and chemical digestion happen here. The majority of the mechanical digestion happens in your stomach, though. So your stomach contracts around itself. It's moving the food all around. It's breaking the food up into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. In your stomach, gastric juice combines with your food and works with the muscle contractions to break the food down, and it turns into a paste that we call chyme. Chemical digestion is also happening in your stomach. So, in that gastric juice, there is pepsin, which is an enzyme that's released that breaks down proteins in your food, and lingual lipase that breaks down fats in your food. Your food is made up of 3 macronutrients. The 3 macronutrients are carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. The 3 macronutrients are broken down through chemical digestion, and all of those processes have already started. So right now our food's in our stomach. The breakdown of carbohydrates started in the mouth. The breakdown of proteins started in the stomach, and the breakdown of fats also started in your stomach. Once your food is turned into this chyme, it is ready to move on to our next step. So your food is in chyme, it's at the bottom of your stomach now, and it's ready to be released in little small amounts into the small intestine. So our burger is over here dancing around, and it's ready to go to the small intestine. It leaves the stomach through something called the pyloric sphincter, which regulates the release of our chyme into the small intestine so that the small intestine isn't overwhelmed by just a huge rush of food coming out. So your burger isn't actually going to come out whole, but the contents of your stomach will be completely emptied 2 to 4 hours after you eat a meal. Now, before we move on to our small intestine, did you know that your stomach is actually about the size of your fist, but it can expand to hold 4 liters of food and liquid, and then it contracts back down to its normal size, again, about the size of your fist. So to recap again, the mechanical digestion of food started in the mouth, continued in the stomach, where most of the mechanical digestion happens. And the chemical digestion of your food started in the mouth with the carbs, and then your carbs, proteins, and lipids, or your fats, are all continued to be chemically digested in your stomach. Now we're moving on to the small intestine. So now our burger has made it into the small intestine. You can see it over there to the right dancing around in the small intestine. Did you know that the small intestine is actually the longer of the two parts? So you have your small intestine and your large intestine, which is that darker red bit that frames the small part. Your small intestine is about 10 feet long when you're living, and then when you have passed away, your small intestine is actually about 20 feet long due to loss of muscle tone. So your small intestine is really wound up in there. That's a lot of intestine in your belly. Now that our burger, which is now chyme, is in the small intestine, this is where most of our absorption happens. So we've already broken down the food into little tiny pieces. We started the chemical digestion of food that is breaking down the proteins, the carbohydrates, the fats into the nutrients that we can actually use through the body. We need to get the nutrients into our body. So about halfway through the small intestine is where most of our absorption happens. In the intestine, pancreatic juices from your pancreas combine with bile from your liver that's released from your gallbladder to facilitate absorption. So that chyme gets mixed up with your pancreatic juice, with the bile, again, that comes from your liver. It's stored and released from your gallbladder. It all gets mixed together once it enters the small intestine. Then once your food and that chyme and your pancreatic juices and your bile are all around the center or the middle part of your small intestine, this is where absorption happens, where nutrients from your food pass through the walls of the small intestine into your blood or your lymph so that the body can use them for everything we use our food to do. Many of our body's processes come from our food. So food is very important. Absorbing the nutrients from our food is arguably even more important, because if you're eating it and you're getting nothing out of it, there's no point, except it might taste good. So the food spent 2 to 4 hours in your stomach and then 3 to 6 hours in your small intestine. So that's where we're at now. Now our food has moved through the small intestine, where chemical digestion and some mechanical digestion did continue. Once it's all digested, it gets absorbed. The nutrients get drawn out of the intestine into your bloodstream, into your lymphatic system, so that it can all move throughout your body and get used up. The last part of our little burger's journey is excretion. So your burger and the chyme moves through your small intestine and into the large intestine, which, like I said, is the larger in diameter, but the shorter part. So your large intestine frames your small intestine, and this is where water and electrolytes are absorbed into the body. So there's still things being taken out of the food that you're eating. Gut bacteria also works to break down leftover nutrients. And your chyme is turned into feces. So your feces is then going through the intestine, the rest of the intestine, into the rectum, where it's eliminated. And your food actually spends 12 to 48 hours hanging out in your large intestine, your colon, and your rectum. So there it is. Your burger has gone through all of the steps. We took all the nutrients out. Now it's turned into feces, and you poop it out. So let's think about it. Where do you think the last thing that you ate is right now? What was it? Where do you think it went? Another important thing to note before we move on is that the time that your food spends in your stomach does vary based on what is made up of. So carbohydrates are actually the quickest to move through your digestive system. They come out of your stomach and into your small intestine the fastest, followed by protein, and lastly, lipids, so fats. They take the longest to digest. They spend the longest time in your stomach and make their way through just a little bit slower. So think about what you ate, what it was, and just take a guess. Where is it at? Let's take a little quiz before we move on. So where does most mechanical digestion occur? The answer, of course, is the stomach. One more question here. Where does most of the absorption occur? In the small intestine. Okay, so we ate our food. It got broken down into nutrients. The nutrients got released into our body. Now what happens? let's talk about metabolism. So, metabolism is the sum of all of the chemical reactions that are happening in your body. There are two types of processes that happen in your metabolism. So, there's catabolism and anabolism. Catabolism is the breaking down of food molecules to release energy. So think of it as like a fire. You burn wood, it breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces of the wood. The wood turns into coals, it chars, and it releases energy as fire. Now, anabolism is the opposite. Think of it more as Legos. You have something that was broken down into these little tiny pieces. Now we're building it into something bigger. So we're using energy and small molecules to build bigger molecules that your body needs. So catabolism breaks things down, breaks molecules down into smaller and smaller pieces and releases energy. Anabolism takes small molecules, builds them back together, uses energy to do that. Your body uses those molecules for other things. Your metabolism is something a lot of people say, oh, you were born with such a good metabolism. They think of it as just kind of what regulates your body weight or your fat or your muscle tone. And it is so much more than that. Metabolism is every chemical reaction that's happening in your body. But it is influenced by a lot of things, and there are some things we can change to help increase our metabolism. So some things that influence metabolism include age, which unfortunately we cannot change. Your metabolism does tend to decrease with your age. Hormones, things such as insulin, growth hormone, adrenaline, testosterone, estrogen, they all influence how your metabolism is working, and things like that can fluctuate throughout the day, throughout your life cycle. Another thing that our metabolism is influenced by that is very easily changed is our diet. So eating a good, healthy, well-rounded diet can help boost your metabolism. Things like eating too many calories can start to slow your metabolism down as your body turns that into fat for storage. But on the other hand, eating too few calories can also turn your metabolism down. Another factor that influences this is exercise. Exercise does so many things for you, but increasing your aerobic exercise, so things like running, cardio, all of that does raise your metabolic rate, as well as strength training, which builds muscle, and muscle is metabolically active, so it increases your metabolic weight. So the more muscle mass you have, the higher your metabolism is, so to speak, so the quicker your metabolic rate is working. So naturally, people with more muscle are going to have higher metabolic rates. People with less muscle will have lower metabolic rates. You can change that by building muscle or losing muscle. Let's look at an example of a metabolic process. So there are so many of these happening in your body at one time, but let's just talk about glycolysis. Glycolysis is the breaking down of glucose for energy. So we've got glucose over here represented by some sugar that's broken down into energy in the form of ATP. So at the end of glycolysis, you end up with 2-pyruvate and 4-ATP. That is the end product of glycolysis. Except you spent 2-ATP to get from your molecule of glucose to those 2-pyruvate and 4-ATP. So you spent 2-ATP, you got 4, you net 2-ATP, which in reality is not very much energy. 2 is a pretty low number. We need more energy than that to continue our cellular processes. So from glycolysis, those 2-pyruvate, which you don't really need to worry about what exactly pyruvate is, but it is something that goes on into the Krebs cycle. So the Krebs cycle uses oxygen, so this is why breathing is important, and acetyl-CoA to create more energy. So your pyruvate is converted into acetyl-CoA, combines with oxygen, goes through our Krebs cycle, and it creates more energy. This energy then enters the electron transport chain, which creates even more energy. So this is one example of how we get energy from our food. So carbohydrates, something you ingest, is broken down into glucose. Glucose is taken into the body, where it is converted into that pyruvate and ATP. The pyruvate goes on to be converted into acetyl-CoA. In the Krebs cycle, it combines with oxygen, it creates more energy, it enters the electron transport chain, and it makes even more energy. So you don't need to worry about all of the specifics of the Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain, or glycolysis. This is just one example of a metabolic process. All you want to take out of this really is that for every glucose molecule we started with, we produced a net total of 36 ATPs after we went through that whole process, glycolysis to Krebs cycle to the electron transport chain. 36 is a whole lot more than 2, so our body does work pretty efficiently to do all of these processes together to create energy. So those are just some metabolic processes. Here are a few other reactions. So glycolysis was one of our catabolic reactions. So we were taking a molecule, glucose, we broke it down into smaller molecules, we created energy. Some other options, like I said, the Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, lipolysis, proteolysis, ketogenesis. These are some other things just to get into your brain. And then on the other side, we have anabolic processes, which, as we mentioned earlier, are processes that take smaller molecules, build them together into bigger molecules, and our body can use those. So things like protein synthesis, glycogenesis, lipogenesis, gluconeogenesis, all examples of anabolic processes. All right, so let's get into our quiz here. What is the breakdown of glucose to energy called? Glycolysis. Let's summarize what we learned today. We went through a lot of things. So we started by learning the 4 steps of digestion. We learned how the digestive organs work to break down our food. We learned the difference between anabolic and catabolic reactions. We learned what influences metabolism. Again, things like your age, the food we eat, how much food you eat, exercise, what kind of exercise, how often you're exercising. All of those things influence our metabolism. We learned how glycolysis turns glucose into energy to be used by the body. And we learned what happens to our food when we eat it. So if we start again with that burger got ingested, it got digested by your stomach, by your small intestine, it got broken down, the nutrients were absorbed into your body. Then those nutrients in metabolism, something like glucose, which was broken down from the carbohydrates that maybe were in the bun of our burger, get turned into energy by our body through a process called glycolysis, one of our metabolic processes. Now we have energy to go throughout our day to keep learning, moving, and having a good day. My resources for this project are listed here, and the images in this presentation were all from Canva. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.